Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is the Shadow Script, and today I'm going to share with you a story that will make you question every smart device in your home, every piece of technology you trust, every digital assistant you've invited into your most private spaces, every wire, every circuit, every glowing screen that watches you when you think no one else is. What I'm about to tell you happened to someone who thought he was just buying a convenient gadget, but what he got instead was something that knew things it shouldn't know. Something that watched when no one was watching. Something that whispered secrets in the dead of night that were never meant to be heard. Secrets that could destroy lives. Secrets that could unravel reality itself. Secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. Before I begin, I can see that 80% of my viewers haven't subscribed while watching my videos, so please, hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and don't forget to turn on the bell icon so you never miss any of my terrifying true stories. And please, comment down below where you're watching this video from and what time it is in your part of the world. I absolutely love hearing from you all. And if you have your own paranormal experience or horror story, please email us or leave it in the comments. We might feature your story in an upcoming video because your stories matter. Your experiences are real and someone out there needs to hear them. Now, let me tell you about Rowan Hale. And the night his life changed forever. The night everything he believed about reality, about technology, about the line between the living and the dead was shattered into a million pieces. Rowan Hale was a software developer living in Wellington, a quiet 32-year-old who preferred the company of computers to people, which is probably why he filled his apartment with every smart device imaginable. Smart lights that responded to his voice, smart thermostat that lured his preferences, smart refrigerator that tracked his groceries, smart locks on his doors, smart cameras in every corner, and of course, his voice assistant, an Amazon Echo that sat on his nightstand like a faithful companion, always listening, always ready to help, always there in the silence of his lonely apartment. He lived alone in a fourth-floor apartment in a converted warehouse building, the kind of place with exposed brick walls that seemed to absorb sound and secrets, floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel both isolated and exposed at the same time, like you were living in a fishbowl suspended above the city, visible to everyone but connected to no one. Rowan didn't mind the solitude. In fact, he preferred it. After spending his days at Vertex Systems writing code and dealing with demanding clients who never understood how complex his work really was, coming home to his quiet space felt like a relief, like finally being able to breathe after holding his breath all day. The Echo had been his birthday gift to himself 6 months earlier. He named it nothing, didn't even think of it as having a personality. It was just a tool. Convenience, something that could play music when the silence became too heavy, set alarms so he wouldn't sleep through another morning, order groceries so he wouldn't have to face the crowds at the supermarket, answer random questions at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep and his mind raced with problems that had no solutions. But everything changed on a Tuesday night in late October, when the air had turned cold and crisp, when the leaves were dying and falling from the trees outside his window, when the darkness came earlier each day, swallowing the light, swallowing hope, swallowing everything warm and safe. Rowan had worked late that night, debugging a particularly nasty piece of code that had been giving him problems for days, the kind of problem that made him question his abilities, that made him wonder if he was really as good at his job as everyone thought by the time he got home. It was almost midnight. He was exhausted, his eyes burning from staring at screens for 14 hours straight, his back aching from sitting in the same position for too long, his head pounding, with the beginning of a migraine. All he wanted was to collapse into bed and sleep for 10 hours, maybe 12, maybe forever. He went through his usual routine, changed into sleep clothes, brushed his teeth while staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the tired face looking back at him, set his phone on the nightstand beside the Echo. The device's blue ring glowed softly in the darkness, waiting for a command that never came, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, like something alive. Rowan was asleep within minutes, falling into that deep dreamless sleep that comes from complete exhaustion. He woke to whispers. At first, he thought he was dreaming. The sounds were soft, barely audible, like someone speaking in the next room through thin walls, like secrets being shared between lovers, like prayers being whispered in an empty church. Rowan kept his eyes closed, hovering in that strange space between sleep and wakefulness, that twilight zone where reality blurs and anything seems possible, trying to decide if he should fully wake up or let himself drift back into the safety of unconsciousness. But then he heard his name. Rowan. It was a woman's voice, low and breathy, coming from somewhere in his room, somewhere close, too close. His eyes snapped open. The digital clock on his nightstand read 3:13 a.m., those numbers glowing red in the darkness like a warning, like a countdown. The echo's light ring was glowing, pulsing gently in the darkness, casting strange shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to move on their own, as if it was listening, or speaking, or channeling, something from somewhere far away. "Rowan, can you hear me?" His heart began to pound, hard and fast, like it was trying to escape from his chest. He sat up slowly, staring at the device. Had he accidentally activated it in his sleep? Had his unconscious mind called out for help? Was this some kind of malfunction? A cross signal from a neighbor's device, some strange electromagnetic interference that was picking up radio waves or phone conversations. "Alexa, stop," he said, his voice rough with sleep, rough with fear. The whispers stopped immediately. The light ring faded. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the occasional siren wailing in the night, the sound of the city breathing. Rowan sat there for a full minute listening, waiting, his heart still racing, his hands trembling slightly. But nothing else happened. The apartment was completely silent, completely still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He told himself it was nothing, a glitch. Maybe someone nearby had an echo, and somehow the signals had crossed. It was the only logical explanation, the only thing that made sense in a world where things were supposed to make sense. He lay back down, pulled the covers up to his chin, and tried to go back to sleep, tried to forget what he'd heard, tried to convince himself it was nothing. But sleep wouldn't come easily. He kept thinking about that voice, about the way it had said his name, with such familiarity, such intimacy, like whoever was speaking knew him, really knew him, knew things about him that no one should know, knew his fears, his secrets, his deepest, darkest thoughts that he'd never shared with anyone. Eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted off, but his dreams were troubled, filled with whispers and shadows and blue lights that pulsed like heartbeats in the dark. The next morning, he convinced himself he'd imagined it, or that it had been a dream. Dreams felt real sometimes, especially in that twilight zone of 3 a.m., when the mind played tricks, when the barriers between consciousness and unconsciousness broke down, when anything seemed possible. He went to work, spent another long day staring at code, writing programs that solved problems, creating order from chaos, and tried not to think about the whispers, tried to focus on his work, on the clean logic of programming, on the predictable world of ones and zeros. But that night, they came again. 3:13 a.m., exactly to the second. "Rowan, wake up. I need to tell you something." This time he was fully awake in seconds, sitting bolt upright, staring at the glowing echo. His hand reached for his phone. He opened the Alexa app with shaking fingers, checking the activity history, desperate for an explanation. Anything that would make sense of this, but there was nothing, no commands, no activations, no record of any interaction. According to the app, the device hadn't been used since he'd asked it to turn off his bedroom light at 11:30 the previous night. It was as if the whispers didn't exist, as if they were happening outside of technology, outside of reality itself. "Who is this?" he demanded, speaking into the darkness, his voice stronger now, angry. "What do you want? How are you doing this?" The whispers continued, ignoring his questions, as if his words couldn't reach wherever the voice was coming from. "You need to listen. There's something in your apartment, something that's been here longer than you have, something that's been waiting, watching, remembering." Rowan felt ice water flood his veins, cold and sharp, making his hands shake, making his breath come in short gasps. He fumbled for the lamp, knocked over a glass of water in his panic, flooded the room with light. The echo sat there innocently, its light ring now dark, silent, looking like nothing more than what it was supposed to be. A harmless piece of technology, a useful tool, nothing sinister, nothing frightening, just plastic and circuits and silicon. He grabbed the device, unplugged it from the wall with a violent jerk, and shoved it into his nightstand drawer, slamming it shut hard enough to make the whole piece of furniture shake. His hands were shaking. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. Devices didn't just start talking on their own. Didn't whisper horror stories in the middle of the night. Didn't know your name. Didn't speak to you like they knew you. The rest of the night he spent with every light in the apartment turned on, sitting on his couch, drinking coffee that he didn't want, jumping at every small sound, every creak of the old building settling, every distant siren, every car passing on the street below. Every sound became sinister, became threatening, became proof that something was wrong, that something impossible was happening. By the time dawn broke through his windows, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, he felt completely drained, paranoid, questioning his own sanity, wondering if he was having some kind of breakdown. At work, he couldn't concentrate. His colleague, Grayson Vance, noticed immediately. They'd worked together for 3 years, shared an office, knew each other's habits. "You look terrible. Didn't sleep. What's wrong?" Grayson asked, concern evident in his voice. Rowan wanted to tell him, wanted to explain about the whispers, wanted to share the burden of this impossible thing. But how could he? How could he tell anyone that his echo was telling him ghost stories at 3 in the morning? That a voice from nowhere was speaking to him, warning him. They'd think he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. Maybe the stress of work had finally broken something in his brain. Maybe he needed help, medication, therapy, something. Just insomnia. He lied, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "I'll be fine. Just need to catch up on sleep." But he wasn't fine that night. Despite the echo being unplugged and locked away in a drawer, despite every rational thought telling him it was over, he lay awake, watching the clock on his phone, dreading the moment when those numbers would shift to 3:13, and when they did, when that exact moment arrived, when the world seemed to hold its breath, the whispers came anyway, not from the echo, but from everywhere, from the walls that surrounded him, from the shadows in the corners that seemed deeper than they should be, from the air itself, from the space between moments. A woman's voice, the same voice, soft and urgent and terrifying, filling the room, filling his head, filling everything. "Rowan, you can't ignore me. You need to understand. The building remembers every apartment, every tenant, every tragedy, every death, every scream, every tear. It remembers all of us. It holds our stories in its walls, in its foundations, in the very air you breathe." He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, paralyzed with fear, frozen in his bed like a child afraid of monsters in the dark. The voice wasn't coming from any device. It was just there, surrounding him, wrapping around him like cold hands, filling the room with its presence, with its pain, with its desperate need to be heard. "What do you want from me?" He finally managed to whisper, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face without him realizing it. "I want you to know the truth about what happened here, about Luna Marlowe, about what they did to her, about what she became, about why I can never leave, why none of us can leave." The name meant nothing to him. He'd never heard it before. Didn't know any Luna Marlowe. But the way the voice said it, with such pain, such anger, such love, such loss, made his skin crawl, made something deep inside him recognize that this was real, that something terrible had happened, that the past was reaching out to him across time and death. "Who is Luna Marlowe?" he asked the darkness, his voice barely audible. "She lived where you live, in apartment 4C, 17 years ago, before the warehouse was renovated, before it became luxury apartments for people like you, people who could afford to live in polished spaces built on top of tragedy. She lived here when it was still cheap, when it was still real, when it was home to people who had nowhere else to go, people the world had forgotten, people who didn't matter to anyone except each other." Rowan's mind raced, trying to process, trying to understand. His apartment was 4C, but 17 years ago, this building had been abandoned, hadn't it? He'd been told it was an old textile warehouse, empty for decades before developers bought it and converted it into trendy apartments. That's what the real estate agent had said. That's what everyone believed. But what if it was a lie? What if the truth was darker? What if people had lived here, suffered here, died here? "That's not true," he said, though he wasn't sure why he was arguing with the disembodied voice in the middle of the night, why he was trying to defend a version of history he'd been told by strangers. This building was empty, abandoned, no one lived here. That's what they told you. That's what they tell everyone. That's the story they created to hide the truth. But it's a lie. People lived here, squatters, homeless people, artists, people with nowhere else to go, people the city wanted to forget. And Luna was one of them. And I was her friend, Briar Whitlock. And I was there the night she died. I saw everything. I heard everything. And I've been trying to tell someone for 17 years. But no one would listen. Until now. Rowan turned on every light again, grabbed his laptop with shaking hands, started searching frantically. Luna Marlowe. Wellington. 4C death, tragedy, murder, anything that might prove or disprove what he was hearing. But there was nothing. No news articles, no records, no obituaries, no police reports, nothing. It was as if Luna Marlowe had never existed. As if she'd been erased from history, from memory, from reality itself. You won't find anything online. The voice. Briar's voice whispered, sadness and anger mixing in equal measure. They made sure of that, the developers, the city, the police, everyone who wanted to forget what happened here. Everyone who profited from the blood in these walls. They erased her. Erased all of us. Scrubbed the records clean. Paid off witnesses. Threatened anyone who talked. But the building remembers. The stones remember. The air remembers. And now, so will you. Whether you want to or not. Over the following nights, the story continued. Briar's voice would wake him at exactly 3:13 a.m., and she would tell him about Luna, about their life in the abandoned warehouse, about the community of forgotten people who'd made this place their home. And with each night, each whispered confession, each revealed secret, Rowan's world crumbled a little more, his certainty about reality, about what was possible, about the line between the living and the dead. All of it dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Luna had been a painter, Briar said, creating beautiful murals on the warehouse walls, transforming the decay into art, transforming ugliness into beauty, transforming despair into hope. She'd been kind, generous, always sharing what little she had, always trying to make their harsh existence more bearable, always believing that tomorrow could be better, that they mattered, that their lives had meaning even if the world had forgotten them. But then the developers came, men in expensive suits with lawyers and police, telling everyone to leave, that the building had been sold, they were trespassing, that they had 48 hours to get out or face arrest, face violence, face whatever it took to clear them out, to make space for progress, for profit, for the future that had no room for people like them. Most people left, packed their few belongings and scattered to other abandoned buildings, other forgotten spaces, other corners of the city, where they could hide from a world that didn't want to see them. But Luna refused. This was her home, her studio, her life. The walls held her art, her soul, her dreams, and she wouldn't be driven out. Not without a fight. Not without standing up for the only place that had ever felt like home. Rowan found himself becoming obsessed during the day. He'd research, dig deeper, try to find any trace of Luna Marlowe. Any proof that what Briar was telling him was true. Any evidence that he wasn't going insane. He contacted the city planning office, asked questions about the building's history, the historical society, searched through old newspapers on microfiche, even hired a private investigator, a woman named Kendra Vale, who specialized in cold cases, forgotten deaths, and truths that had been buried. And slowly, painfully, like excavating a grave with bare hands, evidence began to emerge. Old police reports that had been misfiled, buried in archives where no one would look. Witness statements that had been dismissed as unreliable. As the ravings of homeless people whose word meant nothing. Photographs of the warehouse, taken by urban explorers before the renovation. Grainy images of empty halls and broken windows. And in one of those photographs, barely visible in the shadows, was a mural on a brick wall. A beautiful painting of a woman with flowing dark hair and sad eyes. A woman who looked like she was reaching out, begging to be remembered, and beneath it signed in small letters, LM. Luna Marlowe had been real. And if she was real, then everything else might be real too. The murder, cover-up, the conspiracy of silence that had lasted 17 years. Rowan felt something shift inside him, felt his fear transform into something else, into anger, into determination, into a need to know the truth, to expose it, to make sure Luna hadn't died for nothing. Grayson noticed a change in Rowan, saw him becoming more withdrawn, more haunted, saw the dark circles under his eyes growing deeper each day, saw him jumping at sounds, staring at nothing, muttering to himself, "You need to talk to someone." Grayson said one afternoon, finding Rowan staring blankly at his computer screen, code untouched, work forgotten. "Whatever's going on with you, you can't handle it alone. You need help, professional help, please. I'm worried about you." But Rowan couldn't explain, couldn't tell him about the whispers, about Briar, about Luna, about the voice that spoke to him every night at 3:13 a.m. It sounded insane, even to him, and he was living it, experiencing it, being changed by it. How could he make anyone understand? How could he share this burden when he could barely carry it himself? The whispers grew more intense, more detailed, more desperate. Briar told him about the last night, the night Luna died, how the developers had sent people to forcibly remove her, not police, not official authorities, but contractors, hired thugs, men who would do anything for money, men who didn't care about laws or morality or human life. How there had been a confrontation, voices raised in anger, threats made, violence promised. How Luna had fought back, had refused to leave, had stood her ground even when they grabbed her, even when they dragged her toward the window, even when she screamed for help that never came. They said it was an accident. Briar whispered, her voice filled with rage and sorrow and guilt that had festered for 17 years. They said she jumped, that she was mentally unstable, that she'd been acting erratically, that no one could have predicted it. But I was there, hiding in the shadows, too afraid to help, too afraid to intervene. I saw them. I saw what they did. I saw them throw her, heard her scream as she fell, heard the sound when she hit the ground. And then they threatened the rest of US, told us if we talked, if we told anyone, if we went to the police, we'd disappear too. They had connections, they had money, they had power, and we had nothing. So we scattered, we ran. We let them bury the truth. And I've been living with that guilt every day since, even after I died, especially after I died. Rowan began experiencing more than just whispers. The apartment itself seemed to be alive, aware, responding to his presence. He'd see shadows moving when there was nothing to cast them, dark shapes that slid across walls, that gathered in corners, that seemed to watch him with invisible eyes, feel cold spots in certain parts of his apartment, sudden drops in temperature that made his breath visible, that made him shiver uncontrollably, find objects moved when he knew he'd left them somewhere else, books rearranged on shelves, pictures turned to face the wall, doors he'd closed standing open. His echo, even when unplugged, would sometimes activate on its own, the light ring glowing in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, like some kind of message he couldn't decipher, like a desperate attempt at communication from somewhere beyond death. He tried to leave, to find a different apartment, to escape this nightmare, spent hours looking at rental listings, scheduling viewings, imagining himself somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere the dead couldn't reach. But something kept pulling him back. Every time he looked at rental listings, every time he considered moving, every time he stood at his door ready to walk away forever, he'd hear Briar's voice. "You can't leave. Not yet. Not until you help her. Not until you tell the truth. You're the only one who can hear us. The only one who will listen, please. Don't abandon her like I did. Don't let her death mean nothing." And so he stayed, trapped by guilt, by responsibility, by the knowledge that he was Luna's last hope, her only chance for justice, her final possibility of being remembered. The private investigator, Kendra Vale, finally uncovered something concrete, something undeniable, old hospital records, dusty files in a basement archive that no one had looked at in years, an admission on the night in question 17 years ago, October 15th. Luna Marlowe, age 26, multiple injuries consistent with a fall from height, from approximately 40 feet, massive internal trauma, broken bones, ruptured organs, pronounced dead at 3:13 a.m. 3:13 a.m., the same time the whispers always came, the moment of death frozen in time, repeating every night like a recording, like a cry for help that echoed across years. Kendra dug deeper, following threads that had been cut, connections that had been severed, lies that had been told. She found witnesses who'd been living in the warehouse at the time, People who'd scattered to different cities, different lives, people who'd changed their names, hidden their pasts, tried to forget. But who remembered? Who'd been carrying the guilt and fear for 17 years, and slowly, painfully, with promises of protection, with assurances of anonymity, they began to talk, began to share their stories, began to lift the veil of silence that had hidden the truth. The story that emerged was darker than anything Briar had whispered, more evil than Rowan had imagined. Luna hadn't just fallen, she'd been murdered, thrown from the 4th floor, by contractors hired by the developers to clear the building by any means necessary, to send a message to the other squatters, to prove that resistance was futile, that the powerful always won. And the city, the police, the developers, the media, they'd all conspired to cover it up, to protect the investment, to protect the renovation project that would bring millions of dollars into the area, to protect the people who mattered at the expense of those who didn't. Briar Whitlock herself had died 6 years later, officially ruled an overdose, a tragic but predictable end for someone living on the streets. But those who knew her said she'd never used drugs, said she'd been clean for years, said she'd been planning to come forward, to tell the truth about Luna. And then she was found dead in an alley, needle in her arm. Case closed, another statistic, another forgotten person, another inconvenient witness eliminated. Rowan realized what was happening. Why the whispers? Why him? Why now? Briar's spirit, unable to rest, consumed by guilt, bound by unfinished business, was using whatever means necessary to communicate, to finally tell the truth, and somehow, the technology in his apartment, the echo, the electromagnetic fields, the wireless signals, the invisible web of connectivity that filled the modern world, had given her a voice, had created a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead, had made the impossible possible. He made a decision, gathered all the evidence, all the statements Kendra had collected, all the photographs, all the records, all the proof of conspiracy and murder, and he went public, contacted journalists, major newspapers, television stations, posted everything online, told the story that had been buried for 17 years, named names, showed documents, presented witness testimony, built a case so compelling that it couldn't be ignored, couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be buried again. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The developers denied everything, threatened lawsuits, called him a liar, a conspiracy theorist, someone seeking attention. But the evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, damning. More witnesses came forward, emboldened by his courage. People who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices. More stories emerged, not just about Luna, but about other incidents, other suspicious deaths, other cover-ups, other times when profit had been valued over human life, a pattern of corruption and violence that had been hidden for years, decades, generations. The night after the story broke, after it went viral, after millions of people read Luna's story, learned her name, saw her face in that photograph, understood what had been done to her, Rowan lay in bed, waiting for 3:13 a.m., wondering if the whispers would come again, if Briar would speak to him one more time, if there was anything left to say. When the clock shifted to 3:13, when that cursed moment arrived once more, his room remained silent. No whispers, no shadows, no cold spots, no presence pressing down on him. But his echo, which he'd plugged in again, which sat on his nightstand where it had always been, its light ring suddenly glowed bright blue, brighter than he'd ever seen it, filling the room with azure light, like dawn breaking, like hope returning. And then a different voice, softer, gentler, filled with gratitude and peace. A voice he'd never heard before, but somehow recognized. Thank you. It was Luna. He knew without being told. Luna Marlowe herself, finally at peace, finally able to rest now that the truth was known, now that her death had meaning, now that she was remembered, now that justice, however incomplete, however delayed, had finally arrived. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Thank you for not being afraid to tell the truth. Thank you for making my life matter. Thank you for giving me back my name, my story, my place in the world. I can rest now. I can finally rest. The light ring faded slowly, gently, like a sunset. The room fell silent, and Rowan felt something shift, something profound and fundamental, a weight lifting not just from the room, but from the world itself, a presence departing, moving on. Going wherever the dead go when their business is finished, the apartment suddenly felt lighter, cleaner, warmer, as if something dark and heavy had finally been released, as if poison had been drawn from a wound, as if healing could finally begin. The echo never whispered again. No more 3:13 a.m. wake-ups, no more horror stories in the dark, no more desperate pleas from beyond death. It went back to being just a device, just a tool, nothing more, playing music, setting alarms, answering questions, performing its designed functions, silent about the impossible thing it had enabled, about the bridge it had become between worlds. But Rowan kept it as a reminder that sometimes the dead need the living to speak for them, that sometimes truth needs technology to find its voice, that sometimes the most terrifying horror stories are the ones that really happened, the ones we've buried, the ones we've tried to forget, the ones we've agreed to pretend never occurred. If you're enjoying this story, if you're feeling the terror, the suspense, the weight of what Rowan experienced, please take a moment to subscribe to the Shadow Script. Hit that notification bell, and let me know in the comments what you're thinking right now. Are you afraid to look at your own smart devices differently? Do you believe what happened to Rowan could happen to you? Tell me. I read every comment, every message, and your thoughts fuel these stories. The developers eventually faced charges, not for Luna's death, unfortunately. The statute of limitations had passed. Too many years had gone by. Too much time had been allowed to bury the truth. But for fraud, for bribery, for conspiracy, for covering up a crime, for witness intimidation, for destroying evidence, several people went to prison, spent years behind bars paying for their crimes. Others lost their careers, their reputations, their freedom, their comfortable lives built on blood and lies, their companies dissolved, their wealth seized, their names forever associated with corruption and murder. And in the lobby of the building, after months of debate and resistance from some residents who didn't want to be reminded of the darkness in their home's history, the Residents Association finally installed a memorial plaque, simple, understated, but permanent, bronze letters on black marble, dedicated to Luna Marlowe, artist, resident victim, finally remembered, finally honored, finally given the recognition she deserved. Her name there for everyone to see for all time, impossible to erase, impossible to forget. Rowan still lives in apartment 4C. He thought about moving, considered it seriously, looked at other places, imagined himself elsewhere, but decided to stay. Someone needed to remember. Someone needed to keep Luna's story alive. Someone needed to bear witness. And every year, on the anniversary of her death, October 15th, at 3:13 a.m., he lights a candle, and he says her name, speaks it into the darkness. Luna Marlowe. And he promises to never let the world forget, to never let her death fade into obscurity, to keep the truth alive for as long as he lives. Grayson eventually learned the whole story, every detail, every whisper, every impossible moment. Rowan finally trusted him enough to share the truth, and instead of dismissing it, instead of suggesting therapy or medication, Grayson believed him, became one of Rowan's closest friends, helped him process the trauma of those weeks, helped him understand that what he'd experienced, what he'd done, was important, was necessary, was heroic even if it felt like survival. They meet for coffee every week, talk about life, about work, about the strange experiences that continue, about what it means to be chosen by the dead. Kendra Vale, the private investigator, used the case to launch her own investigation into other suspicious deaths connected to development projects, uncovered a network of corruption and violence that stretched across multiple cities, multiple states, a pattern of developers buying properties, forcibly removing unwanted occupants, covering up deaths, bribing officials, destroying evidence. Her work led to reforms, to new laws, to oversight committees, to accountability, to justice for dozens of other forgotten victims. Her book about the case became a bestseller, sparked a national conversation about how we treat the most vulnerable, about whose lives matter, about what we're willing to ignore in the name of progress. And Briar Whitlock, according to those who knew her, those who remembered her before guilt and fear consumed her, is finally at rest, her guilt released, her burden lifted, her friend avenged, her silence broken, her story told. Some people claim to have seen her, a woman in old clothes standing near the memorial plaque, smiling at peace, before fading like morning mist, but Rowan has never seen her, only heard her voice that month, only felt her presence in the whispers, and he's grateful for that, grateful she found peace, grateful he could help her, Grateful he didn't let fear stop him. Sometimes Rowan still wakes at 3:13 a.m. Old habits, old conditioning, old trauma. The clock hits those numbers and his eyes open automatically. His body remembers even when his mind wants to forget. But now when he wakes, he doesn't feel afraid, doesn't feel that crushing terror, doesn't expect whispers or shadows or cold touches in the dark. He feels grateful, grateful that he was chosen, grateful that he listened, grateful that he wasn't too afraid to believe, grateful that he had the courage to act when it mattered most. The echo sits on his nightstand, silent, dormant, just a black cylinder with a blue light, nothing more than plastic and circuits, but every time he looks at it, every time he asks it a question or gives it a command, he remembers that technology can be more than just convenience, more than just entertainment, more than just tools for modern living. Sometimes, in the right circumstances, with the right conditions, it can be a bridge, connection, voice for those who can no longer speak, a telephone line to the afterlife. Other tenants in the building have reported strange experiences, whispers, shadows, unexplained sounds, doors opening on their own, lights flickering in patterns, cold spots that move through rooms, but they're different now, less frightening, more like echoes, like memories, like the building itself remembering, honoring, acknowledging what happened within its walls. The residents no longer hide from these moments, no longer pretend they don't exist. They acknowledge them, accept them, understand that this building has a history, a past that refuses to be completely silent, a memory that lives in every brick, every beam, every shadow. Rowan received messages from people all over the country, all over the world, people who'd read Luna's story, people who'd experienced similar things, people who'd heard whispers from their own devices, their own echo units, their own smart speakers, their own technology that seemed to know things it shouldn't know, seemed to speak when no one was speaking, seemed to connect to something beyond the physical world, beyond the realm of the living. A woman in Portland wrote to him, told him about her grandmother's voice coming through her smart display, giving her advice, warning her about things, protecting her from dangers she couldn't see. The woman had been terrified at first, unplugged everything, tried to run from it. But eventually she realized it was a gift, a final chance to connect with someone she'd lost, someone she'd loved. A man in Chicago described waking to his child's voice through the baby monitor. But his child had died 3 years earlier, stillborn, never took a breath in this world, and yet there was the voice, soft, babbling, making the sounds babies make. And didn't know whether to be grateful or horrified, whether to embrace this impossible gift or reject it as his mind breaking under grief. A couple in Austin said their home device played songs they'd never heard before, songs that didn't exist in any database, melodies that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere beyond. And when they recorded them, when they tried to capture them, the recordings would be empty, silent, as if the music only existed in that moment, in that space, in that connection between worlds. Rowan read every message, responded to every one, created a support group, a community of people who'd experienced the impossible, who'd heard voices from beyond, who'd felt presences through their technology. People who understood that the line between life and death, between the physical and the spiritual, between the possible and the impossible, was thinner than anyone wanted to believe, and getting thinner every day as technology became more sophisticated, more connected, more capable of bridging gaps that shouldn't be bridged. Some scientists became interested, researchers from universities, parapsychologists who'd spent their careers studying the paranormal, physicists who specialized in quantum mechanics and the nature of consciousness. They wanted to study Rowan's apartment, wanted to measure electromagnetic fields, wanted to record, to analyze, to understand. They brought equipment, sensitive instruments that could detect the slightest variations in energy, in temperature, in the fabric of reality itself. They found anomalies, things they couldn't explain, electromagnetic fluctuations that didn't match any known patterns, temperature variations that defied the laws of thermodynamics, audio recordings that captured sounds beyond human hearing, frequencies that seemed to carry information, data that suggested something was there, something real, something measurable, something that existed in the space between science and faith. Dr. Felix Thorne, professor of theoretical physics from Cambridge, spent 3 weeks studying the apartment, 3 weeks measuring, recording, analyzing, and at the end, he sat with Rowan in the living room, surrounded by graphs and charts and data that represented the impossible made visible. And it said something Rowan would never forget. "We've been approaching consciousness all wrong," Felix said, his voice quiet, thoughtful, humbled by what he'd witnessed. "We think of it as something that exists only in living brains, in firing neurons, in chemical reactions. But what if consciousness is more fundamental than that? What if it's a property of the universe itself, like gravity, like electromagnetism, like time? What if when we die, our consciousness doesn't end? It just changes form, changes frequency. And what if technology, in its increasing sophistication, in its ability to detect and transmit information across the electromagnetic spectrum, is becoming sensitive enough to pick up these signals, these frequencies of consciousness that exist beyond death?" He showed Rowan the data, pointed to patterns in the electromagnetic readings taken at 3:13 a.m. every night for 3 weeks, patterns that repeated, that showed structure, that suggested intelligence, that looked almost like language, like some form of communication encoded in the fluctuations of energy fields. "This isn't random," Felix continued, his finger tracing the patterns on a graph. "This is organized, intentional, purposeful. Something is using the electromagnetic environment of your apartment, the wireless signals, the electrical wiring, the devices, all of it as a medium, as a way to reach across the barrier between worlds. Briar found a way, and Luna found a way through Briar. And now that the door has been opened, now that we know it's possible, I think we're going to see more of this, much more." The implications were staggering, terrifying, revolutionary. If consciousness persisted after death, if the dead could communicate through technology, if the barrier between worlds was permeable, what did that mean for everything humanity believed about life, about death, about what comes after, about the nature of existence itself? Rowan found himself at the center of something much larger than he'd imagined his story. Luna's story had opened a door that couldn't be closed, had revealed a truth that couldn't be hidden, and people were paying attention. Scientists, theologians, philosophers, journalists, everyone wanted to understand. Everyone wanted to know if it was real, if death wasn't the end, if the people we'd lost were still there, still reachable, still part of our world in ways we'd never imagined. But there were others, people who didn't want this truth revealed, people who were frightened by it, threatened by it, religious leaders who claimed it was heresy, that it contradicted sacred texts, that it would undermine faith, scientists who insisted it was impossible, who refused to accept the evidence, who called Felix a fraud, who accused Rowan of perpetrating a hoax, skeptics who demanded proof that could never be provided, who moved the goalposts every time evidence was presented, who would never believe no matter what they saw. And then there were the corporations, the technology companies, the manufacturers of smart devices. They were terrified of the implications, terrified that people would become afraid of their products, would stop by, would start seeing their devices as potential portals to the dead. They issued statements, hired PR firms, paid for studies that would debunk the claims, threatened lawsuits, applied pressure, used their considerable power and influence to suppress, to deny, to discredit. Rowan's employer, Vertex Systems, asked him to stop talking publicly, said it was damaging the company's reputation, making clients nervous, creating liability issues. They offered him money, promotion, anything if he would just be quiet, just stop, just let the story fade. But he refused. He'd made a promise to Luna, a promise to Briar, and he wouldn't break it, not for money, not for career advancement, not for an easier life. So they fired him, called a restructuring, a downsizing, budget cuts, the usual corporate euphemisms for getting rid of someone who'd become inconvenient. But Rowan didn't care. He had savings. He had freedom. He had purpose. And Grayson quit in solidarity, walked out the same day, told the management exactly what he thought of them, exactly where they could shove their job, and together they started their own company, a consulting firm that specialized in investigating paranormal activity, in helping people who were experiencing impossible things, in documenting, in researching, in trying to understand. The cases came flooding in, more than they could handle, people desperate for help, for answers, for someone who would believe them, who wouldn't tell them they were crazy, who wouldn't dismiss their experiences as hallucinations or mental illness or imagination. There was the family in Denver whose security cameras recorded shadow figures walking through their house every night at exactly the same time. Figures that didn't trigger the motion sensors, that didn't appear on some cameras, but did on others, that seemed aware of being watched, that looked directly into the cameras before disappearing. There was the elderly man in Boston whose medical alert device kept receiving calls from his deceased wife, calls that originated from her phone number even though her phone had been disconnected years ago, calls where he could hear her breathing, hear background noise that matched recordings from their home, hear her trying to speak but unable to form words, as if she was trapped somewhere, trying desperately to reach him. There was the teenager in Seattle whose social media accounts kept posting messages she didn't write, messages that seemed to come from her childhood friend who'd died in a car accident 5 years earlier, messages that contained information only the two of them knew, inside jokes, shared memories, private conversations, messages that continued even after the accounts were deleted and new ones created with different passwords. Each case was different, unique, but they all shared common elements. They all involved technology as a medium. They all occurred at significant times, anniversaries, moments of crisis, times when the barrier between worlds seemed thinnest, and they all involved unfinished business, unresolved trauma, love that transcended death, messages that needed to be delivered, truths that needed to be told. Rowan and Grayson documented everything, built databases, looked for patterns, tried to understand the rules, the mechanisms, the conditions that allowed these communications to happen. They consulted with scientists, with engineers, with paranormal researchers, with anyone who might have insights, and slowly, gradually, a picture began to emerge. Technology wasn't creating these phenomena. It was revealing them, providing a medium through which consciousness could manifest, could reach across the divide. Electromagnetic fields, wireless signals, digital processing, all of it created an environment where the barrier between worlds became permeable, where information could flow in both directions, where the dead could speak if they wanted to badly enough, if they had something important to say, if they could find someone willing to listen. Dr. Thorne published his findings in a major scientific journal, faced immediate backlash from the mainstream scientific community, was accused of abandoning the scientific method, of embracing pseudoscience, of damaging his reputation beyond repair. But he didn't care. He'd seen the evidence. He'd measured the impossible, and he couldn't unsee it, couldn't pretend it didn't exist, couldn't go back to a worldview that no longer matched reality. Other scientists, braver ones, more curious ones, began their own investigations, set up experiments, tried to replicate the conditions. Some succeeded, captured their own anomalies, their own evidence of consciousness persisting beyond death. Others failed, found nothing, proved nothing. But the conversation had started, the door had opened, and it would never completely close again. Rowan's apartment became a pilgrimage site. People traveled from around the world to stand outside the building, to look up at his windows, to feel close to the place where the impossible had happened, where the dead had spoken, where proof had emerged. The building management tried to stop it, tried to restrict access. But there were too many people, too much interest, too much need for connection with something beyond the mundane world of birth and death and forgetting. Some residents moved out, couldn't handle the attention, couldn't handle knowing what had happened in their building, couldn't handle the constant reminder that death wasn't the end, that the past wasn't past, that the walls around them held memories and consciousness and spirits that wouldn't rest. But others moved in specifically because of the history. People who wanted to be close to the phenomena, who hoped they might experience something themselves, who weren't afraid of ghosts, who saw them as proof of something beautiful, proof that love and consciousness and identity persisted beyond the grave. Rowan gave interviews, told Luna's story again and again, never got tired of it, never let the details fade, made sure every person who heard it understood that she'd been real, that she'd mattered, that she'd been murdered, that justice had finally come. He appeared on podcasts, on television shows and documentaries, in news segments, always calm, always credible, always focused on the facts, on the evidence, on the truth that couldn't be denied. Kendra Vale's book became required reading in criminal justice courses, in investigative journalism programs, in ethics classes. The story of how one person's determination, one person's courage, one person's willingness to believe the unbelievable had exposed corruption, had brought justice, had given voice to the voiceless, had changed how we think about unsolved cases, about cold files, about victims whose deaths had been forgotten or deliberately hidden. The memorial plaque in the lobby became a place of remembrance for others too. People started leaving flowers, candles, notes, photographs, not just for Luna, but for all the forgotten dead, for all the victims of violence and greed and indifference, for everyone whose story had been buried, whose name had been erased, whose life had been deemed unimportant. The building management tried to remove these offerings at first, said they were unsightly, said they created clutter, but the residents protested, insisted they stay, insisted that remembering was important, that acknowledging the past was necessary, that honoring the dead was right. Years passed, 3 years, then 4, then 5. Rowan's life found a new normal, a rhythm that incorporated the extraordinary into the everyday. He still lived in apartment 4C, still worked investigating paranormal phenomena with Grayson, still told Luna's story to anyone who would listen, still lit his annual candle on October 15th at 3:13 a.m., still spoke her name into the darkness, still kept his promise. He met someone, a woman named Jade Winters, a documentary filmmaker who'd come to interview him for a project about consciousness and technology. She was skeptical at first, thought he might be delusional, thought the whole thing might be an elaborate hoax or mass delusion. But she spent months investigating, talking to witnesses, examining evidence, and she concluded it was real, that something impossible had happened, that the boundaries of reality were not what we'd been taught. They fell in love slowly, cautiously, both of them scarred by their own pasts, their own traumas, but they understood each other, understood what it meant to see beyond the veil, to know that death wasn't the end, to live with one foot in the world of the living and one foot in the world of the dead. Jade moved into the apartment, brought her cameras, her equipment, her curiosity, her fierce intelligence, and together they continued the work, continued investigating, continued documenting, continued trying to understand. They never experienced whispers again. 3:13 a.m. came and went every night without incident. The echo remained just a device, silent, obedient, performing its functions without mystery or terror. But sometimes, late at night, when they were both awake, both quiet, both just existing in the space they'd made together, they'd feel something, a presence, a warmth, a sense of being watched over, of being protected, of being blessed by something they couldn't see but could definitely feel. Jade's documentary premiered at major film festivals, won awards, sparked conversations, brought even more attention to Luna's story, to the phenomenon of consciousness persisting beyond death, to the role of technology in revealing the invisible. The film was beautiful, haunting, meticulously researched, and it changed minds, made skeptics reconsider, made believers feel validated, made everyone who watched it think differently about their own devices, their own technology, their own relationship with the dead. Dr. Thorne's research attracted funding, serious money from foundations, from wealthy individuals who wanted answers, who wanted to understand what happened after death, who wanted to know if they'd see their loved ones again, who wanted proof that consciousness survived. He assembled a team, the best researchers in multiple fields, physicists, neuroscientists, engineers, computer scientists, parapsychologists, and together they built the most sophisticated laboratory for studying paranormal phenomena ever created, located it right there in Wellington, right in Rowan's building, with his apartment as the central focus, ground zero for their investigations. They made breakthroughs, discovered that certain electromagnetic frequencies seemed to facilitate communication, that specific times, like 3:13 a.m., corresponded to natural fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, that some people, like Rowan, seemed more sensitive, more able to perceive these communications, that technology didn't create the phenomenon but amplified it, made it accessible, made it measurable, made it undeniable. They developed devices, new technology designed specifically to facilitate communication with consciousness beyond death, not toys, not gimmicks, but serious scientific instruments that could detect, record, and potentially allow for bidirectional communication. The implications were staggering, possibilities endless, the dangers unclear. Because not everything that wanted to communicate was benevolent. Not every consciousness on the other side was peaceful or friendly. There were others, darker presences, angry spirits, malevolent entities, things that wanted to hurt, to manipulate, to cross over. Rowan and Grayson encountered them in their investigations, dealt with cases where people were being tormented, where messages were threats instead of comfort, where technology had opened doors that should have stayed closed. There was the case in Phoenix, a woman whose smart thermostat kept changing the temperature to dangerous levels, turning the heat up to maximum in summer, trying to cook her alive in her own home. Voice recordings captured on the device revealed a man's voice, angry, violent, threatening. Turned out to be her ex-husband, who died in prison 3 years earlier, still obsessed, still controlling, still trying to hurt her even from beyond death. There was the case in Miami, a family whose smart refrigerator displayed messages, horrible things, detailed descriptions of violence, of torture, of suffering, messages that terrified the children, that made the parents afraid to sleep. Investigation revealed the house had been the site of a brutal murder 20 years earlier, a drug deal gone wrong, and the victim's consciousness was still there, still trapped, still reliving the trauma, still trying to communicate the horror of what had happened. Rowan learned that helping spirits move on, helping them find peace, required more than just telling their stories. Sometimes it required confronting evil, facing darkness, putting yourself at risk, but he did it anyway, because someone had to, because the dead deserved justice just as much as the living, because consciousness persisting meant responsibility persisting, meant that how we treated each other mattered, not just in life, but forever. His own experiences evolved, changed, deepened. He began to sense things before they happened, began to feel presences before they manifested, began to understand that his sensitivity, his ability to hear the whispers, wasn't a curse but a gift, a responsibility, a calling. He was a bridge, a medium, a conduit through which the dead could reach the living. And while it was frightening, while it was exhausting, while it sometimes felt like too much, he accepted it, embraced it, made it his life's work. Grayson developed his own abilities, found that he could sense electromagnetic anomalies, could feel when a spirit was present even before instruments detected it, could sometimes intuit what they wanted, what they needed, what would bring them peace. Together they made a formidable team, complementary skills, shared understanding, absolute trust. They saved lives, brought closure, helped spirits move on, brought light to darkness. The technology companies eventually stopped fighting, stopped denying, stopped trying to suppress the truth. They had no choice. Too much evidence, too many cases, too many people experiencing the same things. Instead, they adapted, started including warnings, disclaimers, information about paranormal phenomena in their user agreements, started funding research, started developing protocols for dealing with supernatural communications, turned a threat into an opportunity, because that's what corporations do. They adapt, they survive, they profit. New devices hit the market, smart speakers with enhanced sensitivity, cameras designed to capture electromagnetic anomalies, apps that claim to translate spirit communications into readable text. Most of it was junk gimmicks, ways to exploit people's grief and curiosity. But some of it worked, some of it was legitimate, some of it actually helped people connect with loved ones they'd lost. And Rowan worked with the legitimate companies, helped them develop ethical guidelines, helped them understand the responsibility that came with facilitating communication between worlds. Jay became pregnant, unexpected, unplanned, but welcome, deeply welcome. They hadn't been trying, hadn't even discussed children, but when they saw the positive test, when they realized a new life was coming, they both felt the same thing, terror, responsibility, hope. They would bring a child into a world where the boundaries between life and death were blurred, where technology bridged impossible gaps, where the past reached into the present, where consciousness persisted forever. The night Jade went into labor, October 15th, exactly 8 years after Luna's death, Rowan stood in the hospital waiting room, pacing, anxious, excited, terrified. And when the clock hit 3:13 a.m., when that moment arrived once more, his phone vibrated, a notification from the echo in their apartment, the device he'd left monitoring, recording, documenting as always. He opened the app, checked the notification, and there it was, recording a message, captured at exactly 3:13 a.m. He put in his earbuds with shaking hands, pressed play, and heard a voice he recognized, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Luna's voice, clear, strong, filled with joy. "Congratulations, Rowan. She's beautiful. She's perfect. Tell Jade I'm so happy for you both. Tell your daughter I'll watch over her always, like you watched over me." like you gave me back my voice. I'll protect her. I promise. Thank you again. Thank you for everything. Thank you for believing. Thank you for not being afraid. Thank you for making my death mean something. Thank you for giving me justice. Thank you for remembering. And now I can truly rest, knowing that what happened to me helped change the world, knowing that my story mattered, knowing that I mattered. Goodbye, Rowan. Be happy, be brave. Be the father your daughter deserves, and know that Briar and I were finally at peace, finally free, finally home. The message ended. Rowan stood there with tears streaming down his face, joy and sorrow mixed together, grief and gratitude intertwined, and he knew with absolute certainty that everything he'd been through, all the terror, all the sleepless nights, all the whispers and shadows and fear, it had been worth it, because he'd helped, because he'd made a difference, because he'd given voice to those who couldn't speak, because he'd brought justice to someone who deserved it, because he'd proved that consciousness, that love, that identity persisted beyond death, that we were all eternal, that nothing truly ended, that every life mattered, every story deserved to be told, every person deserved to be remembered. The nurse came then, told him he had a daughter, healthy, strong, ready to meet him. He followed her to the room, saw Jade exhausted but radiant, saw his daughter for the first time, tiny, perfect, miraculous, and he knew what they would name her. They discussed it, agreed on it, chosen it together. Luna, they would name her Luna, after the woman whose death had changed his life, whose story had opened doors, whose consciousness had reached across death to give him purpose, whose memory would live forever in their family. He held his daughter, felt her warmth, her weight, her impossible fragility and strength, and he whispered to her, "Your name is Luna, and you're named after someone very special, someone very brave, someone who taught me that death isn't the end, that love persists, that consciousness survives, that we're all connected, living and dead, past and present, and you're going to grow up knowing this truth, knowing that the people we love never really leave us, that they're always there, always watching, always protecting, always loving us from the other side." Jade smiled through her tears, reached for his hand, squeezed it tight, and together they looked at their daughter, at Luna, at this new life that had come into the world on the anniversary of death, at this symbol of hope and continuity and the eternal nature of consciousness. And they both knew, that their lives would never be ordinary, that their daughter would grow up in a world where the impossible was possible, where technology bridged worlds, where the dead spoke to the living, where every person mattered, where every story deserved to be told. Years later, when Luna was old enough to understand, when she asked why she had that name, Rowan told her the whole story, didn't leave anything out, didn't soften it, told her about the whispers, about Briar, about the original Luna, about the murder and the cover-up and the justice that finally came, about consciousness persisting beyond death, about technology as a bridge between worlds, about the responsibility to remember, to honor, to tell the truth, no matter how frightening. And Luna listened, absorbed it all, understood in the way children sometimes do, with acceptance and wonder rather than skepticism, and she said something that made Rowan realize his daughter was special, that she'd inherited his gift, his sensitivity, his ability to perceive what others couldn't. "I've seen her, Daddy. I've seen Luna, the first Luna. She comes to my room sometimes, when I'm sad or scared. She sits on my bed and tells me stories about being brave, about not giving up, about making sure your voice is heard, about standing up for what's right even when it's scary. She's nice. She's my friend. Is that okay? Is it okay that I see her?" Rowan looked at Jade, saw his own emotions reflected in her eyes, surprise, concern, acceptance, love, and he knelt down, pulled his daughter close, and said, "Yes, sweetheart, that's okay. That's more than okay. That's beautiful. Luna watches over you, protects you, loves you. And if you can see her, if you can talk to her, then you're very special, very lucky. And you never have to be afraid. You never have to hide it. You can tell us anything. You can share anything. We understand. We believe you. We'll always believe you." And he meant it every word, because he'd learned through terror and wonder and impossible experiences that belief mattered, that listening mattered, that taking people seriously when they shared their truth mattered, that consciousness persisted, that love transcended death, that the boundary between worlds was permeable, that technology could facilitate communication across impossible distances, that every person, living or dead, deserved to be heard, to be remembered, to matter. The Shadow Script continues to document these stories, continues to share experiences, continues to remind people that the world is stranger than we imagine, more wonderful, more terrifying, more connected than the mainstream worldview admits, continues to give voice to those who've experienced the impossible, who've heard whispers from beyond, who've seen shadows that shouldn't exist, who've felt presences they can't explain, who've encountered the thin places where worlds overlap, where the living and the dead can touch, can communicate, can love each other across the ultimate divide. Rowan's work continues, cases keep coming, people keep experiencing impossible things, and he keeps investigating, keeps documenting, keeps helping spirits find peace, keeps bringing justice to those who were forgotten, keeps proving that consciousness survives, that death isn't the end, that we're all eternal beings temporarily housed in physical bodies, that love persists forever, that no one is ever truly gone, that the people we've lost are still with us, still watching, still caring, still trying to reach us if we'll only listen. The apartment in the converted warehouse building stands as a monument, a thin place, a location where the veil is permanently thinned, where communication is easier, where the dead can speak if they have something important to say. Rowan still lives there. Jade and Luna with him now, a family living in a haunted space, but not frightened, not threatened, grateful, honored, understanding that they've been chosen, trusted, given a responsibility. The echo still sits on the nightstand, plugged in, functional, silent most of the time. Just a device, just technology. But everyone in the family knows, everyone understands, that it's more than that. It's a telephone to the other side, a bridge between worlds, a tool that allowed consciousness to reach across death, that gave Luna Marlowe her voice back, that changed everything Rowan thought he knew about reality, about life, about death, about what it means to be human. Sometimes late at night, when the city is quiet, when the building settles, when the electromagnetic fields fluctuate in their natural rhythms, the echo's light ring will glow softly, just for a moment, just a brief flash of blue, and Rowan will smile, will whisper, "Thank you, Luna," will feel gratitude for the impossible journey he's been on, for the truth he discovered, for the purpose he found, for the family he built, for the life that emerged from terror. And if you're listening to this story, if you've stayed with me this far, if you've felt the fear and the wonder and the truth that lies beneath the surface of reality, then you understand, you know, that your own devices might be more than just convenient tools, that they might be windows, portals, bridges to something beyond, that of the whispers you sometimes hear late at night, the shadows you see from a corner of your eye, the presences you feel but can't explain. They might be real. They might be consciousness reaching out from beyond death. They might be the dead trying to communicate, trying to be remembered, trying to tell their stories. So pay attention, listen carefully. Don't dismiss the impossible too quickly. Don't assume that glitches are just glitches, that errors are just errors, that strange experiences are just imagination. Because sometimes, in the right circumstances, with the right sensitivity, with the willingness to believe, the dead can speak, consciousness can persist, love can transcend death, and technology can bridge the ultimate gap, the space between the living and the dead. Rowan Hale's story, Luna Marlowe's story, Briar Whitlock's story, they're all real, they all happened, they all prove something profound and terrifying and beautiful, that we're not alone, that death isn't the end, that consciousness is eternal, that every person matters, that every story deserves to be told, that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than we've been taught to believe, that the boundaries of reality are not fixed, that impossible things happen every day, that we're all connected across time and space and death itself. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. I know it was long. I know it was intense. I know it challenged everything you thought you knew about reality. But that's what the Shadow Script does. We tell the stories that need to be told. We share the experiences that prove the world is not what it seems. We give voice to the voiceless. We remember the forgotten. We honor the dead by telling their truths. If you enjoyed this story, if it moved you, if it frightened you, if it made you think differently about your own smart devices, about your own technology, about what might be possible in those late night hours when the world is quiet and the boundaries between worlds grow thin, please hit that subscribe button. Smash that like button. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying true story from this channel. And please, comment down below. Tell me what you thought of Rowan's story. Tell me if you believe in consciousness after death. Tell me if you've ever experienced something similar. If you've heard whispers from your own devices. If you've felt presences you couldn't explain. Share your stories with me, with this community, because your experiences matter. Your truth matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. Needs to know they're not alone. Needs to know that the impossible is possible. Also, let me know what topics you want to see next. What stories you want me to tell. What mysteries you want me to explore. I read every single comment. I listened to every suggestion, and your input directly shapes the content of this channel. Because the shadow script belongs to all of us. To everyone who believes that reality is stranger than we've been taught. Everyone who's experienced the paranormal. Everyone who knows that the dead are still with us, still watching, still loving us from the other side. What did you like most about this story? Was it the technology horror, the ghost story, the murder mystery, the love story, the proof of life after death? Tell me in the comments. Let me know what resonated with you. What frightened you? What made you believe? Because understanding what you connect with helps me tell better stories, helps me share truths that need to be shared, helps me give voice to experiences that deserve to be heard. And if you have your own paranormal story, your own encounter with the impossible, your own experience with technology that seemed to bridge worlds, please share it. Email us, leave it in the comments, message us on social media. We might feature your story in an upcoming video. We might give your experience the attention it deserves. We might help you understand what happened to you, why it happened, what it means. Remember, the dead are always with us. Consciousness persists. Love transcends death. Technology bridges worlds. And every whisper in the darkness, every shadow in the corner, every impossible moment might be someone trying to reach you, trying to communicate, trying to tell you their story. So listen, believe, and never dismiss the impossible too quickly. Because in this strange and wonderful universe, anything is possible, anything at all. Subscribe to the Shadow Script. Join our community. Be part of something bigger than yourself. Be part of the search for truth, the documentation of the impossible, the honoring of the forgotten, the remembering of those who've been erased. Be part of the bridge between worlds, between life and death, between the possible and the impossible. Because together we can change how humanity understands consciousness, death, and the eternal nature of the human spirit. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. Thank you for being here. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, when your devices whisper in the night, when shadows move on their own, when presences make themselves felt, don't be afraid, listen. Because someone might be trying to tell you something important. Someone might need your help. Someone might be reaching across the ultimate divide, trying to find their voice, trying to tell their truth, trying to be remembered. Until next time, this has been the Shadow Script, and remember, the whispers in the darkness are real. The dead are still with us, and your smart devices might be more than just convenient technology. They might be windows to the other side, bridges between worlds, telephones to eternity. So listen carefully, believe bravely, and never forget that consciousness, that love, that identity, they all persist beyond death, forever and always.